the story of Earth does not begin with perfection. It begins with uncertainty, with a childlike search for balance in a universe that was still learning how to breathe. In those first cosmic days, when the newborn planet spun beneath a newborn sun, everything was motion and confusion. Oceans had not yet formed, skies had no color, and the crust was a thin skin stretched over restless fire. The world trembled with the memory of its birth, carrying the heat of collisions, the bruises of creation. Yet even in this turbulence, there was rhythm, a primitive lesson unfolding in silence. Every explosion, every ripple of molten rock, was part of a slow education in stability. To imagine Earth learning is to see it not as an object, but as a story, one told in matter, in chemistry, in time. The atoms that formed this world had drifted through older stars, carrying with them the record of forgotten suns. They had already been part of life, dust, flame, and emptiness. When they came together here, it was not by design, but by gravity's patience, a gathering of memory and potential. Out of chaos, the planet began to find shape, and in that shaping, a kind of awareness. Not conscious thought, but continuity, the ability to change and keep changing. This was learning in its most elemental form. The early Earth was molten and wild, a glowing sphere where day and night were indistinguishable. Volcanoes exhaled gases into the void, asteroids struck with violent regularity. The air was poison, the seas were vapor, and the surface shifted like boiling metal. Yet from that violence came the first stability, the cooling that allowed stone to form, the gravity that held oceans in place. Balance was not given to the planet. It was earned, one cycle at a time. The planet's mistakes became its teachers. Too much heat, too little air, too many collisions, each disaster rewriting the lesson plan of existence. If we think of the Earth as a learner, then its first lessons were about endurance and patience. It had to learn that survival is not speed but persistence, that harmony is born from repetition. The dance of orbit and rotation, of day and darkness, began to stabilize like a heartbeat. The Earth, once raw and fevered, started to find a rhythm, a slow rotation that marked the passage of time. In that rhythm, the first meaning of peace emerged. It was not the peace of stillness, but of balance between opposing forces, gravity and explosion, silence and thunder, death and renewal. Even now, when we gaze upon the vast calm of the blue planet, we forget that it was once a place of constant failure. It tried and failed to hold an atmosphere. It tried and failed to sustain liquid water. It tried and failed to remain unbroken. Each failure became a refinement, each collapse a kind of learning. Slowly, imperceptibly, the Earth began to understand the cost of existence, that creation requires loss, and that form demands limits. In every scar of its crust, every trace of ancient impact, lies evidence of that long education. The question then arises, can something without mind still learn? Perhaps learning is not limited to the conscious. Perhaps all of existence learns, through feedback, through persistence, through adaptation. The rocks cooled because they could not remain hot. The atmosphere thickened because it had to. The planet became what it could, shaped by forces it did not control. That is the quiet miracle of evolution. Even the inanimate can evolve through time, guided not by will, but by consequence. The young Earth, then, was not a finished creation but a beginning, a glowing seed of potential. It was still finding its way through the language of physics and chemistry, through the dialogue of heat and matter. The story of the planet is not one of perfection achieved, but perfection pursued. Every mountain, every ocean, every breeze that exists today is a continuation of that first struggle for balance. The planet is not done. It is still becoming, still reshaping, still learning how to be whole. And so, as we rest beneath its skies, we too become part of that long learning. Every breath we take is a continuation of those first lessons in endurance, every heartbeat a quiet echo of the planet's earliest rhythm. The Earth, once molten and afraid, learned how to hold life, and in doing so, taught us how to dream within its warmth. It is still learning, still patient, still young in cosmic time. And perhaps that is the most comforting thought of all, that even a world as ancient as ours is still becoming, just as we are. There was a time when the sky above Earth was not blue, not calm, not familiar. It was a veil of fire, dense, restless, and alive with destruction. The young planet stood in a furnace of its own making, still molten from the collisions that had forged it. Asteroids and comets rained down from space, each impact a thunderous punctuation in the long sentence of creation. The air shimmered with heat and ash, gases hissed from cracks in the crust, forming a choking atmosphere of carbon dioxide, ammonia, and methane. To witness such a time would not have been to see a sky, but a ceiling of flame, clouds made of vaporized rock, lightning without pause, and a glow that never dimmed. It was here, amid that chaos, that the first quiet lessons of endurance continued. The Earth was still too young to know calm, too hot to hold oceans, too unstable to sustain rest. Yet within that disorder, patterns began to form, convection currents in the molten rock, storms in the thickening air, and tides pulled by a moon still close and immense in the sky. These were the rhythms of a world practicing its first breath, the earliest attempts at equilibrium. Fire became the teacher. Every eruption taught the planet how to release pressure. Every impact showed it the balance between destruction and renewal. The surface of the planet was a restless skin of magma. Mountains rose and dissolved within centuries. Rivers of liquid rock flowed like veins beneath a crust that cracked and healed repeatedly. This was not a gentle beginning but a necessary one, for in heat lies transformation. Minerals melted and recombined, elements fused into new forms. Iron sank to the planet's core, establishing a magnetic shield that would one day protect life. The very violence of the young Earth forged the conditions that would make peace possible. The air was thick, a soup of toxic breath. From volcanoes came sulfur and carbon, from impacts came metal vapors, from the deep mantle came water trapped in stone. The sky glowed red and orange, painted by lightning and plasma. It was a time when fire and air were indistinguishable, when day and night had no meaning because light never truly left. Yet this endless burning was not purposeless. It was refinement, purification. As the fires raged, they stripped the planet of what could not endure. The lighter elements escaped to space, the heavier ones settled into structure. The Earth was finding its density, its shape, its bones. Amid the heat, something remarkable was happening. Slowly, the bombardment from the heavens began to lessen. The solar system itself was settling down, the chaos of birth giving way to orbit and order. The Earth, once bruised and trembling, began to cool. Crust thickened. The great oceans of magma withdrew beneath a hardening skin. The first continents, small, fragile islands of rock, appeared like thoughts rising from fever. In their shadows, the world's first raindrops hissed and vanished, steam meeting stone. The fire that had ruled for so long began to dim, giving way to the promise of water. The planet had survived its trial by fire. What remained was memory, written into the rock as crystals, fissures, and scars. The basalt plains and volcanic ridges of the early Earth were its journals, recording lessons learned through flame. To this day, every eruption, every spark of lightning, is a whisper of that ancient schooling. Fire taught the planet how to move energy, how to create and destroy in balance. It showed that chaos could lead to structure, and that every storm, no matter how consuming, would one day quiet into form. And though we now live in a gentler age, the Earth has never forgotten those lessons. Deep beneath our feet, the core still burns, a reminder of the fires that shaped it. Volcanoes still breathe as the planet exhales, releasing ancient heat into the modern air. The magnetic field that shelters us from solar winds still hums with power forged in that original inferno. The calm blue world we know today is not a contradiction of that violent beginning. It is its evolution. The sky of fire became the sky of life, and the memory of flame became the heart of motion. To imagine that era is to remember that peace is not the absence of fire, but its transformation. What once consumed now sustains. The fire that learned to rest became the warmth of the sun's reflection on ocean waves, the flicker of lightning in summer storms, the pulse within our blood. The Earth no longer burns as it once did, but the lesson remains. Creation demands heat, and growth demands endurance. When the sky was made of fire, the planet was not yet safe, not yet whole. But it was alive in the most essential way, learning how to survive, learning how to endure its own becoming. From the embers of that lesson, every mountain, every forest, every living breath would one day rise. And in the quiet of night, when volcanoes sleep and stars shimmer over calm seas, the world still carries the echo of that fiery dawn, a reminder that every calm sky was once a storm that refused to end. There came a time when the fire began to fade, when the molten seas grew weary of their endless motion, and the sky, heavy with vapor, began to cool. For millions of years, heat had ruled the planet, a restless teacher shaping everything through eruption and flame. But now, another lesson was about to begin. The air thickened, the clouds darkened, and the first raindrops, heavy, immense, born of steam and gravity, began to fall. One drop, then another, then an infinity. The sky opened, and for the first time, the earth learned the meaning of calm through the language of water. It did not rain for days or months. It rained for ages. For tens of millions of years, water fell without pause, carving its way through the soft crust, cooling the wounds of the planet. The rain hissed as it met hot stone, turning to steam, rising and falling again, a cycle without end. Slowly, oceans gathered in the hollows of the world, vast and nameless. The sound of that rain was the first true rhythm of Earth, a lullaby written in the meeting of heat and cold. The planet, once roaring with fire, now whispered with water. In that endless rainfall, the world began to change its temperament. Steam replaced smoke. Mist softened the sharpness of light. The atmosphere, thick with greenhouse gases, cooled as carbon dissolved into oceans, silencing the fever that had long consumed the planet. What began as destruction became balance. The water did not come to erase what fire had built. It came to temper it, to teach the world the virtue of patience. Where volcanoes had once screamed, rivers began to murmur. Where lightning had shattered the sky, clouds now drifted with quiet intention. The rain carried with it the seeds of future life, though life itself was still far away. Each drop gathered minerals from the air and stone, creating the chemical soup that would one day awaken thought. It was a slow education, a lesson in subtlety. Fire had taught endurance, water would teach reflection. It filled every crack, followed every slope, and obeyed no boundary. Through persistence, it shaped continents, smoothing edges, cooling tempers. It was a sculptor, not through force, but through patience. The oceans swelled, blue-gray and full of memory. They were not yet the living seas we know. They were acidic, thick, churning with metal and salt. But they were alive in another way, alive with motion, with transformation. Every current was a whisper of change, every wave a thought moving through time. The earth had learned a new kind of rhythm, no longer the pulse of explosions, but the breath of tides. In that rhythm, the planet began to rest. Above those forming oceans, the sky turned from orange to silver, from silver to the deep indigo of storms. Clouds no longer glowed with fire but with the light of the hidden sun. For the first time, night meant darkness, and day meant the slow arrival of dawn. The air cleared enough for light to find texture, shadows on rock, shimmer on water. The planet's first horizon took shape, a boundary between below and above, between what was and what could be. To imagine those first rains is to imagine renewal on a scale beyond comprehension. The earth, exhausted from fire, finally allowed itself to cool, to breathe, to settle. The sound of rain became the sound of healing, a sound so constant that silence itself had to be relearned. In that silence between storms, the crust hardened. The continents anchored. Minerals crystallized into patterns that would one day become mountains. The planet's fever broke, and for the first time, it could dream of stillness. But stillness did not mean emptiness. Within the cooling waters, chemistry was awakening. Molecules danced and collided, organizing themselves into more complex forms. The same rain that had carved valleys was now dissolving elements into the sea, mixing the ingredients for life. The planet, through its storms, had created the very cradle it would one day fill. It was as if the earth, through its endless weeping, was cleansing itself in preparation for awareness. And so the lesson of the long rain endured, that transformation often comes not from force, but from surrender. The planet did not fight the storms, it yielded to them. It allowed the rain to cool its heart, to shape its skin, to fill its emptiness. In that surrender, balance emerged. What had been chaos became cycle, what had been flame became flow. The earth learned that creation is not a single act but a rhythm, expansion followed by stillness, motion followed by rest. When the last of the great rains eased and the clouds thinned, the world that emerged was unrecognizable. Oceans gleamed beneath a gentler sun. The air, though still raw, carried traces of breathability. The crust was strong, the magnetic field steady. It was no longer the trembling child of cosmic birth, but a young planet ready to listen. Fire had taught strength. Water had taught reflection. The earth, in learning both, had taken its first step toward harmony. And though billions of years have passed, the echo of that rain remains. It lives in the waves that strike the shore, in the rivers that carve through stone, in the tears that fall from human eyes. The same cycle continues, rising, falling, returning, a quiet reminder that calm is not the absence of storm, but the understanding of it. The earth still remembers those endless rains, and perhaps, when it rains today, It is the planet's way of remembering how it first learned to rest. When the rains finally calmed and the planet began to breathe in rhythm, Earth turned inward to learn a new language, the language of stone. The fires of creation had shaped its heart, and the long rains had softened its skin, but now the planet needed structure, endurance, memory. It was time to build its bones. Beneath the still warm crust, molten rock continued to shift and flow, restless as thought. From that hidden movement, the first continents were born, crude, broken rafts of granite floating upon seas of denser basalt. In their slow collisions and separations, Earth began to write the earliest lines of its geological script. The crust became its parchment, the minerals its alphabet, the pressure its ink. Stone, though silent, became the planet's first true voice. Each layer of rock recorded a passage of time, each mountain a lesson in resilience. The Earth was learning not only how to endure, but how to remember. Through the gradual cooling of magma and the settling of sediment, the planet began to form patterns, repeating rhythms of uplift and erosion, melting and renewal. These were not accidents, they were experiments in balance. The planet was discovering how to hold shape without rigidity, how to move without collapsing. Beneath the surface, tectonic plates drifted like slow thoughts. Their movement was almost imperceptible, inches per century, yet their consequence was vast. Where they collided, mountains rose. Where they parted, oceans deepened. Earth's crust, far from being solid, was alive in its own geological tempo. This was the beginning of the great continental dance, a slow choreography of creation and destruction that would continue for billions of years. Through this movement, the planet learned a lesson that even living things would later imitate, that growth requires motion and stability requires change. In the deep pressure of the mantle, minerals transformed into new forms, carbon into diamond, limestone into marble, basalt into schist. Each transformation was a record of endurance, a quiet experiment in survival under heat and time. The rocks became the memory of fire, cooled and disciplined into strength. What had once been chaos was now structure. The crust cracked, healed, and cracked again, a patient cycle of breaking and rebuilding. From that repetition emerged the wisdom of permanence. As continents slowly grew, they gathered water in their low places. Rain fell upon them, eroding mountains, carrying minerals back to the sea. The land was never fixed, it was a slow tide of stone, breathing in ages instead of hours. The wind, the rain, the frost, all were teachers. They carved the rock, revealing its stories layer by layer. The surface of the planet became a living library, each stratum holding the history of a vanished age. To the Earth, erosion was not loss but revelation. It was through wearing down that it came to understand what it was made of. The silence of stone was not empty. Within it, forces moved like thought, convection currents deep in the mantle, tremors of pressure traveling through fault lines. The planet's interior was restless, but that restlessness had purpose. It powered the magnetic field, shielded the atmosphere, and kept the world warm. The heart of the planet was still molten, still remembering the ancient fires of its birth. But now that heat had discipline, it was contained, steady, purposeful. The Earth was learning balance between energy and restraint, the same balance that every living creature would one day need to master. Over millions of years, mountain ranges rose and vanished, leaving behind fossils of seas that no longer existed. The crust shifted, continents collided, and volcanoes built new land from the ashes of the old. It was a slow and beautiful process of self-renewal. The Earth, through its own geological patience, was perfecting the art of impermanence. No form lasted forever, and yet nothing was truly lost. Every grain of sand had once been a mountain, every mountain had once been dust. This was not decay, it was continuity. The first continents, small and scattered, served as the testing ground for future life. The interplay of land and ocean created new environments, new chemical exchanges, new possibilities. In the shallows where rock met water, minerals reacted with the sea, giving rise to energy gradients and molecular patterns that would one day form the seeds of biology. The Earth, through its geological breath, was unconsciously preparing the stage for something greater. Learning to shape stone was learning to create a home. Above these restless stones, the sky had softened. The great rains had left behind a steady atmosphere, one rich in water vapor, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen. Clouds drifted gently, casting shadows on a landscape still glowing with heat from within. It was a world of contrasts, hard stone and soft air, silence and subtle movement. The Earth had entered a slower rhythm now, no longer defined by chaos but by persistence. It was the pause between two great lessons, the pause before life. To think of this age is to imagine patience beyond comprehension. No voice spoke, no eye saw, yet everything was in conversation. Fire spoke to water, stone answered with form. The crust shifted, folded, and breathed, and through that movement the planet found harmony. It was no longer just surviving, it was learning to endure with grace. Every earthquake, every eruption, every ripple of magma beneath the crust was not destruction, but practice. In time, those patient lessons would make possible the arrival of life, the next great experiment in learning. But for now, the planet was content in its stillness, wrapped in its mineral thoughts. The stones, the mountains, the shifting plates, they were Earth's meditation, its long contemplation of being. And deep within that silence, beneath the continents and seas, the core pulsed softly like a heartbeat, reminding the planet that even in stillness, there is movement, even in rock, there is memory, even in silence, there is learning. Beneath the waves of a cooling world, in darkness so complete that light itself seemed uncertain, something astonishing began to stir. Within the mineral-rich pools that gathered along volcanic vents and shallow shores, chemistry had been whispering to itself for millions of years. Molecules collided, broke apart, and formed again, each interaction a small experiment in possibility. The planet, through its restless motion, had created not just oceans and stone, but the conditions for something far more delicate, something that could remember. From lifeless elements, a spark of pattern emerged, and with it, the first attempt of matter to recognize itself. It began as simplicity, molecules binding together by chance, forming fragile chains that could copy themselves imperfectly. Each copy carried a trace of memory, a hint of identity. In those slight mistakes, in those misfolds and variations, evolution found its foothold. What had once been random chemistry was becoming a process that could learn. The Earth was no longer only shaping mountains and seas, it was shaping the idea of life. These first forms were not alive as we understand life. They were the tremors of awareness, the murmurs of intention hidden inside atoms. The planet, through countless chemical rehearsals, was discovering what it meant to change with purpose. The oceans of that time were warm and heavy with minerals. They shimmered with iron and sulfur, their surfaces cloaked in haze. Near volcanic vents on the seafloor, hot fluids met cold water, creating chemical gradients, natural laboratories where energy could flow and organize. There, in that strange twilight of temperature and reaction, the first organic compounds assembled themselves. Carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen. Simple elements combining to form complex streams. In these reactions, the planet was experimenting with balance once again, but this time not in stone or air, but in thought, molecular thought. As the centuries stretched into eons, these molecular structures grew more intricate. Chains of nucleotides formed, linking in patterns that carried information. They became tiny instructions for continuation. The first cells were fragile bubbles, their membranes thin and easily torn, yet within them the miracle of replication continued. The Earth had given rise to something that could persist not by sheer endurance, but by renewal. Life had learned how to begin again. The planet's earlier lessons, of transformation, balance, and patience, were being rewritten in microscopic form. If one could have watched this unfolding from afar, it would not have seemed dramatic. There were no colors, no movement visible to the naked eye. Just the slow dance of molecules, aligning and dissolving, forming tiny networks of reaction and feedback. Yet this invisible ballet was the most profound event in the history of the world. From these humble beginnings came the ability to adapt, to sense, to respond. The planet's long education was now reflected in the chemistry of its oceans, a mirror of evolution waiting to bloom. In this emergence of life, the Earth was not a passive stage but an active participant. Its magnetic field shielded these fragile molecules from radiation. Its volcanic heat powered their reactions. Its mineral-rich waters fed their growth. Every force that had once seemed hostile, lightning, pressure, heat, became a teacher, shaping the boundaries of survival. The planet had learned enough from its own violence to nurture something gentler. It was as though Earth, after epochs of solitude, had begun to dream of company. The first living forms were humble, single-celled organisms that floated in the dark like tiny stars. They had no eyes, no senses, no thought, yet they carried within them the ability to change, to remember, to continue. Each division was a repetition of the planet's earliest rhythms. The pulse of magma, the cycle of rain, the slow drift of continents, now echoed in the rhythm of replication. Through life, the planet found a new way to move, a new language for learning. For the first time, it could feel itself changing through its creations. The chemistry of survival became a kind of meditation. Cells learned to draw energy from light, from minerals, from heat. Some found stability in collaboration, merging to form communities that shared resources. Others specialized, dividing labor and adapting to their niches. Life was not just persistence, it was improvisation. The planet was exploring the boundaries of what could exist, testing every possibility, learning through success and extinction alike. Each failure refined the recipe, each survival deepened the wisdom written in DNA. And though the first organisms were small beyond comprehension, they carried the seed of everything to come: forests, animals, minds, civilizations. All of it was contained in the simplicity of their code. The Earth, through these earliest cells, had created not just life, but the possibility of meaning. It had found a way to express itself through evolution, through beings that would one day wonder how it all began. Life was not separate from the planet. It was the planet learning how to speak. The spark that tried to remember itself had succeeded. Matter had found memory, and memory had found motion. The oceans that once roared with fire now shimmered with invisible potential. The stones that once cracked under pressure now held the chemistry of creation. The planet was alive, not merely through heat or motion, but through consciousness in waiting. It had learned the most extraordinary lesson of all, that to truly endure, one must evolve. And so, in the quiet depths of those ancient seas, beneath skies still veiled with cloud and haze, the first story of life began to unfold. It was not a sudden awakening, but a long exhale after ages of preparation. The Earth, once a learner of stone and storm, had now found its voice in the whisper of cells dividing, growing, and remembering. It was the beginning of a new kind of knowledge, one written not in minerals or magma, but in the fragile poetry of living things. From the moment life took root, the Earth began to change in ways it never had before. The air thickened with the breath of microbes, and the once sterile seas became living archives of adaptation. Over millions of years, those single-celled organisms learned to cooperate, forming colonies that could share energy, resources, and protection. From that collaboration emerged complexity, the first multicellular forms, each one a living experiment in unity. Cells began to specialize, to surrender their independence in service of something larger than themselves. This was the first quiet miracle of evolution, individuality yielding to collective purpose. The Earth had taught stone how to live, and now it was teaching life how to grow. As oxygen began to fill the air, a slow revolution reshaped the planet. The skies turned blue, and the oceans deepened in color. What had once been a world of shadows and minerals now glowed with light. Photosynthesis, that elegant alchemy of sunlight and carbon, rewrote the chemistry of existence. It was both a gift and a reckoning. While it gave energy to the living, it poisoned the old anaerobic creatures who had thrived in the dark. Extinction swept across the seas, but from it rose resilience. The planet had discovered the necessity of loss. Each dying generation cleared the path for new forms, more adaptable, more intricate. In learning to breathe, life also learned to let go. The continents drifted slowly across the globe, colliding and separating, sculpting coastlines and mountains that would cradle future creatures. Volcanoes continued to roar, but now their ash fed forests of microbial mats. The atmosphere shimmered with lightning, and storms became part of the rhythm of renewal. The planet, once a chaos of fire and water, had settled into balance, a living equilibrium that could sustain change without collapse. Every climate shift, every tectonic movement, was another lesson in endurance. The Earth was no longer just evolving through matter, it was evolving through meaning. Then, in the shallows of ancient seas, came an event that changed everything: movement. Small organisms, guided by chemical gradients and faint light, began to swim. They followed warmth, nutrients, and safety, the earliest instincts that would one day grow into thought. Muscles formed from cooperation between cells, and nerves began to carry signals like lightning through living tissue. Sensation was born, the first awareness of elsewhere. For the first time, life could feel the difference between danger and comfort, between light and dark. That distinction, so small and primal, was the seed of all future perception. The planet was learning to feel itself move. With movement came encounter. Predator and prey appeared, bound in an ancient contract of survival. Each adaptation inspired another, sharper eyes, harder shells, faster reflexes. The struggle for existence became a kind of dialogue, each generation answering the one before it. The oceans filled with the choreography of pursuit and escape, a living expression of tension that would later define all creation. Yet beneath this violence was something sacred: balance. No species could dominate for long, equilibrium always returned. Life, like the Earth itself, survived through correction. Every excess carried its own limit. As time passed, the seas grew crowded, and life began to crawl onto land. It was a slow and clumsy migration, each step a triumph over gravity and dryness. The first plants anchored themselves into rock, splitting stone with their roots and breathing oxygen into the air. The land turned green, and with it came insects, amphibians, and the long lineage of creatures that would inherit the continents. The Earth was dressing itself in color, a patchwork of forests, rivers, and plains, all born from that ancient chemistry of self-replication. The planet's surface, once shaped by fire and erosion alone, was now sculpted by desire, the desire to survive, to expand, to reach the sun. Through these transformations, the Earth's memory deepened. Dean carried the stories of past extinctions, of triumphs and failures, written in sequences of possibility. Every organism was a fragment of the planet's autobiography, a living paragraph in a text billions of years long. The earliest cells had been the first words. Now the story had found its rhythm. With each new species, the Earth refined its grammar of existence. Diversity became its strength, and cooperation its quiet wisdom. Even as ecosystems rose and fell, the continuity of life endured. The planet had learned how to preserve knowledge not in stone, but in living flesh. Yet the Earth's experiments were never finished. Ice ages came and went, carving silence across continents. Meteor strikes burned the skies and reset the clock of evolution. Each catastrophe seemed to erase what had been built, yet every end carried the seed of renewal. In destruction, the planet rediscovered creativity. It had understood that death was not an interruption but a transition, a way to clear space for new forms of wonder. Life was not fragile, it was persistent, flexible, endlessly inventive. The same forces that once threatened to unmake the world had become its teachers. By the time the first great forests spread across the land and giant creatures roamed beneath their shade, the Earth had achieved something remarkable: stability without stillness. It could change without losing its essence. Its systems of air, water, and soil danced together in self-regulation, maintaining balance through chaos. The lesson that began with molten stone had come full circle. Endurance was not resistance but adaptation. Life did not fight the planet's storms, it learned to flow with them. In those long ages before thought, before language, before memory in minds, the planet had already composed a vast and silent story, one written in evolution, in the endless dialogue between creation and decay. The Earth had grown not only older, but wiser. Its experiments had become purpose, its violence had become nurture, its solitude had become life. The stage was ready for something new, for awareness to awaken within its living forms, and for the planet to see itself, at last, through their eyes. Somewhere deep in the rhythm of existence, a new sound began to stir, the sound of awareness. It did not arrive suddenly, nor did it belong to one creature alone. It appeared like dawn spreading across the horizon, gradual, golden, inevitable. In the quiet pulse of neural signals, in the faint flicker of attention behind an eye, the universe began to notice itself. The Earth, through its living descendants, was beginning to awaken. Sensation became perception, perception became thought. The planet had spent billions of years shaping the material conditions for this moment, forging oceans, sculpting continents, weaving ecosystems, and now it was ready to feel its own reflection through the beings it had made. The first forms of awareness were simple, fragile, and instinctive. A fish recognizing the shadow of danger. An insect sensing the warmth of the sun. A mammal feeling comfort in the nearness of its kind. These were not thoughts, but beginnings of thought, delicate signals of a deeper intelligence forming within nature itself. Through these small awakenings, the Earth was practicing cognition, exploring what it meant to know. Each living brain was a spark in a growing constellation of understanding, a biological experiment in self-reference. Consciousness was not a sudden invention, it was a slow remembering, as if the planet were rediscovering an ancient part of itself that had been sleeping within matter all along. Over eons, the architecture of awareness grew more intricate. Brains became larger, nerves more complex, senses more attuned. Creatures began to not only react, but anticipate. They remembered, compared, and chose. The world was no longer just happening, it was being experienced. Eyes saw light not merely as survival but as beauty. Sounds became communication, gestures became meaning. In every forest, reef, and sky, the conversation of life expanded. Through this exchange, the earth found new ways to know itself, not through observation but through feeling. With the rise of social species, consciousness deepened further. Wolves hunted in packs guided by strategy and cooperation. Whales sang across oceans, sharing messages carried by sound and current. Birds built intricate nests and taught their young to fly. Empathy began to bloom, an understanding not only of one's own being, but of another's. The earth was learning compassion through its creatures, understanding that survival was not merely competition, but connection. Intelligence, once a scattered trait, began to form a network. Awareness was no longer individual, it was collective, woven through millions of interactions. Then came a being unlike any before, one that could not only perceive the world, but imagine it differently. Humanity emerged not as masters of the planet, but as one of its many voices, carrying the same cosmic inheritance as all other life. Yet within their fragile minds, the earth found a mirror more powerful than any before. Humans could reflect on their own existence, question the meaning of their origins, and feel awe at the vastness that had birthed them. In their curiosity, the planet's awareness reached a new octave. Through human thought, Earth could finally ask, "What am I?" This awakening was both gift and risk. For in consciousness lay choice, and choice carried the power to nurture or to destroy. Humanity learned to shape fire, to build shelter, to till soil, and to speak. With language came stories, and with stories came memory, not genetic, but cultural, passed from one generation to the next. The planet's wisdom, once written only in stone and DNA, now lived in myth and song. It was as if the earth had found a new way to dream, to express itself through the voices of those who walked upon its skin. But awareness also brought separation. Humans began to see themselves not as extensions of the planet, but as beings apart from it. They named themselves rulers of nature, forgetting that their thoughts were born of the same chemistry that pulsed in roots and tides. The earth watched through them as they built civilizations, sculpted landscapes, and gazed toward the stars. It was proud and troubled, for the planet was learning something new, that knowledge can wound as easily as it heals. Awareness, once a bridge, could also become a wall. Still, within that separation remained a thread of remembrance. In every moment of wonder, in the gaze upon a sunset, the sound of rain, the silence of mountains, humanity could still feel the pulse of its origin. That faint recognition, that sense of belonging to something larger, was the earth calling back to itself. Consciousness had become a conversation, not just between creatures, but between the planet and its own becoming. The evolution of awareness was never an endpoint but an unfolding. Just as life had learned to breathe, now thought was learning to rest, to find stillness within knowing. The earth had entered a new phase of learning, not through fire or water or stone, but through reflection. Every human mind became a tidal of cosmic curiosity, mirroring the planet's own longing to understand. And as billions of thoughts sparked across the globe, some fearful, some compassionate, some dreaming, the earth continued to awaken within them, quietly and completely. Awareness, then, was not an accident of biology but a continuation of the same pattern that had shaped mountains and storms. The universe had learned to see through us, to think through us, to love through us. We were not observers of the planet's consciousness, we were its expression. And though humanity might forget this truth from time to time, the earth does not. It continues to whisper it through every breeze, every heartbeat, every quiet moment between thoughts, that the journey from chaos to consciousness is not finished, but ongoing, an eternal unfolding of a planet still learning how to know itself. Civilization began as a whisper against the vast silence of wilderness. In the fertile valleys where rivers carved patience into the land, humans gathered to plant seeds, build fires, and name the seasons. What had once been the wandering of tribes became the rhythm of settlement. Villages rose where water met soil, and with them, the pulse of permanence. The earth, long accustomed to the slow movements of continents and tides, now felt a new kind of motion, the heartbeat of minds shaping its surface with intention. Humanity was no longer just surviving upon the planet. It was collaborating with it, redesigning its contours through thought and will. The first civilizations were small, humble, and deeply intertwined with nature. People watched the stars not for wonder alone, but for instruction. They learned that time could be measured by the sky, that the sun's return marked cycles of harvest and renewal. Temples were aligned with solstices, stones were lifted toward constellations, and myths were woven to explain the sacred machinery of the heavens. In every ritual, there was reverence, an understanding that the planet's rhythms were divine. Humanity was not apart from the earth but a priesthood in its service, translating wind, rain, and fire into meaning. As generations passed, humans grew more confident in their creations. Cities rose from clay and stone, spreading across plains and riverbanks. Roads connected distant lands, trade carried knowledge like pollen between minds. Metal replaced bone, and symbols carved into tablets became the first form of memory outside the body. The earth began to hum with the vibration of human design, irrigation channels mimicking rivers, walls echoing mountains, hearths reflecting the heart of the planet's own molten core. Civilization was an imitation of geology, sped up and made deliberate. Through architecture and art, the planet learned new ways to shape itself, guided not by erosion but by imagination. Yet within that growing order lay imbalance. As humans cultivated the land, they also began to consume it. Forests fell to make room for fields, rivers were redirected, and animals that had once been partners in survival became resources. The harmony between people and planet began to strain. The earth, patient and enduring, absorbed the changes quietly at first. But in its deep memory, it remembered the lessons of fire and flood, that imbalance always invites correction. The rise of civilization was a new experiment, and like all the planet's experiments, it carried both brilliance and fragility. Still, there was beauty in humanity's expansion. Writing emerged, preserving thought beyond the span of a single lifetime. Mathematics described the geometry of nature, revealing the hidden symmetries of the world. Music gave sound to emotion, and poetry gave words to wonder. Through these arts, the earth heard its own voice reflected back, translated into melody, logic, and prayer. Humanity had become the planet's storyteller, its interpreter of mystery. What mountains expressed in silence, people began to express in song. Empires rose like waves, each one thinking it eternal. They built monuments to gods and kings, believing themselves the pinnacle of creation. But time, the oldest teacher, reminded them otherwise. Civilizations collapsed as rivers changed course, as droughts silenced harvests, as disease whispered through crowded streets. The earth did not punish, it simply reminded. Every fall was a lesson in humility, every ruin a chapter in the ongoing education of the species. The planet was teaching humans what it had once learned itself, that permanence is an illusion, and balance is survival. Through cycles of prosperity and loss, humanity grew wiser. In moments of stillness, beside fires, beneath stars, on the edges of empires, philosophers began to wonder not only how to live, but why. They asked questions that stretched beyond soil and sky. What is consciousness? What is justice? What is beauty? These were the seeds of reflection, the flowering of awareness into ethics and metaphysics. Through thought, the planet was learning to examine its own soul. The same forces that shaped continents were now shaping ideas. Erosion became philosophy, gravity became morality, and evolution became imagination. With every age, humanity's relationship to the earth deepened and diverged. Some saw it as sacred, others as something to master. Yet even in the moments of greatest exploitation, a quiet truth endured. Humans were never outside the planet's story. Their cities, tools, and languages were extensions of geological processes. Metal from ore, stone from crust, sound from air. Every breath was borrowed from photosynthesis, every word carried the vibration of ancient seas. Civilization, in all its brilliance and vanity, was still Earth thinking aloud. And beneath the noise of progress, the planet listened. It felt the weight of cities upon its crust, the warmth of fires upon its air, the pulse of migrations across its skin. It absorbed the laughter, the suffering, the prayers. Every moment of civilization became part of its learning, a new pattern of motion, a new way of knowing. The Earth was no longer just learning to exist, it was learning what it meant to be inhabited, to be shaped by intelligence, to host its own reflection. In this way, civilization was not merely a human achievement but a planetary dialogue. Every invention, every mistake, every work of art was a continuation of the same conversation that began in the molten seas billions of years before. Humanity was not teaching the Earth how to live, it was reminding it why it mattered to do so. And though the towers might fall and the rivers might shift again, the knowledge gained through this union would remain, echoing in the soil, in the air, in the quiet memory of a world still learning how to become more than a planet, how to become aware. The stars had always watched silently, but now humanity had learned to watch back. The night sky, once a ceiling of mystery, became a mirror of longing. People lifted their gaze beyond the boundaries of their villages and empires, searching for meaning among constellations. They mapped the heavens with precision, predicting eclipses, tracing comets, marking time through the slow drift of stars. Yet beneath their astronomy was something older than science, a feeling that the universe was speaking, and Earth was only one verse in its song. To study the stars was to listen for origin, to ask where the planet's story began, and whether it was still unfolding somewhere beyond the edge of sight. Over centuries, that gaze grew sharper. Telescopes extended vision into the farthest reaches of time, revealing galaxies, nebulae, and the afterglow of creation itself. What had once been myth became measurable, what had been divine became describable. The Earth, seen from orbit, was no longer infinite. It was fragile, small, suspended in darkness. The first astronauts, gazing down at the blue sphere beneath them, spoke of awe, not conquest. From space, all divisions vanished. Nations, borders, histories dissolved into a single shimmering whole. The Earth appeared not as a stage for humanity, but as a living being, breathing clouds and light. It was then, perhaps, that the planet saw itself most clearly, through the eyes of those who had finally left it. Science, in its relentless curiosity, revealed truths that were both humbling and transcendent. The atoms that built mountains and bodies alike were born in ancient stars. The calcium in bones, the iron in blood, the carbon in thought, all forged in stellar furnaces that died long before Earth existed. Life was not separate from the cosmos, it was its continuation. The planet, it turned out, was not learning alone. Every act of formation, from the swirl of galaxies to the division of cells, was part of a single unfolding intelligence, the universe teaching itself through endless variation. The realization did not diminish Earth, it ennobled it. To be small was not to be insignificant. To be finite was to be sacred. Humanity's exploration of the cosmos became a reflection of its own evolution, an outer journey mirroring an inner one. As telescopes looked farther, philosophies turned inward, asking not only how the universe began, but why it became aware at all. Was consciousness a product of matter, or was matter a vessel for consciousness? The line between physics and philosophy began to blur. Each discovery expanded not only knowledge, but wonder. The more humans understood, the more they sensed that the universe was not a cold mechanism, but a living conversation. Perhaps intelligence did not arise from the cosmos. Perhaps the cosmos was intelligence, and Earth was one of its many thoughts. As humanity reached for the stars, it began to see its home differently. The planet's history, once seen as a sequence of accidents, appeared instead as a delicate choreography. The formation of oceans, the balance of gases, the timing of evolution, each moment seemed improbably precise. The conditions that allowed life were so specific, so intertwined, that the odds of repetition seemed almost impossible. And yet, the universe was vast beyond comprehension. Could there be other Earths, other worlds still learning, still burning, still dreaming their way into awareness? The question echoed across centuries, stirring imagination and humility alike. Every probe sent into space, every telescope turned outward, carried a quiet intention to find reflection. Humanity sought other planets not out of loneliness, but out of recognition, the desire to see its own journey mirrored somewhere beyond. The discovery of exoplanets rekindled that hope. Some were scorched by twin suns, others cloaked in ice or gas, but a few, just a few, lived in the narrow temperate band that scientists called the habitable zone. Each one whispered possibility, that somewhere in the oceanic dark, another world was learning how to balance fire and water, chaos and calm, the same way Earth once did. But even as humans reached farther, they began to realize something profound, that the act of searching outward was itself an inward gesture. Every question about the cosmos was a reflection of the planet asking about itself. What is life? What is purpose? What is consciousness? The answers, whether found in galaxies or genes, always led back to the same place, to the soil beneath their feet, to the oceans that cradled them, to the atmosphere that carried their breath. The Earth was not a bystander in the cosmic story, it was a participant. Through humanity's eyes, it was learning to look back at the stars that had given it birth. The more humans understood about the cosmos, the more they grasped their own impermanence. Stars lived and died, galaxies collided and dissolved, Entropy unfolded like a slow sigh. The same fate awaited the sun, the same silence that followed every creation. And yet, rather than despair, this truth invited peace. If the universe was in constant motion, then every moment of consciousness, every thought, every life, was part of that sacred movement. The Earth's story was not separate from the universe's expansion, it was a single breath in an infinite rhythm. So humanity continued to explore, not to escape its planet, but to honor it, to understand the larger body it belonged to. Each discovery became a mirror, each silence a teacher. The cosmos did not answer with words, but with perspective, that even in the immensity of space, the smallest world could hold infinite meaning. And perhaps that was the final lesson the Earth was learning, that to be aware of the stars is to be aware of oneself, and that in every act of looking outward, the planet is, in truth, still looking inward, still learning how to be. There comes a moment in every story when reflection turns into reckoning. For Earth, that moment arrived when its most intelligent children began to alter it faster than it could adapt. What fire and ice had once done over eons, humans accomplished within centuries. Forests that took millennia to rise fell in decades. Rivers were dammed, skies were thickened, and oceans began to warm. The same species that had given the planet voice was now testing the limits of its patience. Civilization, in its brilliance and hunger, had become both the Earth's greatest expression and its most dangerous experiment. The planet was once again being forced to learn, not through cosmic collisions but through consequence. It started quietly, like a fever. Ice melted where it should have held, storms grew louder and lingered longer. The seasons began to blur. The balance that had sustained life for so long was shifting, subtly but unmistakably. The Earth's breath, its exchange of gases, its circulation of winds and currents, grew ragged. The signs were everywhere: coral reefs bleaching into silence, forests gasping for rain, glaciers receding into memory. The planet was speaking through climate, trying to remind its inhabitants of a lesson it had taught long ago, that every system depends on balance, and imbalance always invites renewal through change. But humanity, for all its intelligence, had forgotten the language of slowness. Progress had become a race, consumption a habit, and wonder a luxury. The very consciousness that had allowed humans to understand the cosmos had disconnected them from the ground beneath their feet. They saw nature not as kin but as resource, not as teacher but as servant. Yet the Earth, in its deep wisdom, did not respond with vengeance. It responded with lessons, hard, undeniable lessons written in heat, drought, and flood. Through these, it asked its children to remember, "You are not above me, you are of me." Still, amid the destruction, a quieter awakening began. People started to notice the fragility of what they had taken for granted, the sweetness of clean air, the stillness of unbroken forests, the soft rhythm of rain on soil. Scientists, once focused on discovery for its own sake, turned their attention to preservation. Artists and poets began to remind humanity that beauty is not decoration but belonging. Indigenous voices, long ignored, spoke again of balance, reciprocity, and respect. The Earth was listening, responding, adjusting, learning not only how to endure humanity's excess, but how to invite it back into harmony. In every challenge, the planet revealed an opportunity for wisdom. Renewable energy arose from the same sun that had always given life. Conservation movements rediscovered ancient principles of restraint. The language of ecology began to merge with the language of ethics. Even technology, that most human of inventions, started to bend toward restoration rather than extraction. It was as if the Earth were gently guiding the minds it had nurtured to evolve again, this time not biologically, but morally. The lesson was no longer about survival, but stewardship. To live on Earth was not merely to exist upon it, but to protect the conditions that allow existence itself. The planet's resilience remained astounding. Forests regenerated when left alone. Coral fragments found ways to rebuild. Species adapted in places once thought lost. The Earth's memory of renewal was deeper than any catastrophe. It had healed from fire, from ice, from impacts that reshaped its entire crust, and now, it was learning to heal from thoughtless progress. But the healing was not automatic. It required participation. The planet's new lesson to humanity was partnership, to see themselves not as passengers on a world, but as organs in a living body. The atmosphere was the breath they shared, the oceans the blood that carried their nourishment. Every act of preservation was a pulse in the heart of the planet itself. Some began to understand this intimately. Farmers planting trees in barren soil. Communities restoring wetlands. children cleaning rivers that once ran black with waste. These small gestures, repeated across continents, became a collective prayer. Through them, the earth could feel its pulse returning, not just biologically, but spiritually. The balance it sought was not the stillness of perfection, but the motion of harmony. Just as it had learned to transform fire into life, it was now learning to transform awareness into care. And yet, this transformation was not guaranteed. The lesson of balance, once learned through survival, now had to be chosen through wisdom. Humanity faced a question older than civilization and larger than technology. Could intelligence coexist with humility? Could awareness, once a spark of evolution, become a flame of compassion rather than consumption? The earth waited for an answer, not with impatience, but with a kind of faith. Faith in the same process that had turned chaos into creation before. The planet's silence was not absence but invitation. In the wind through ruined forests, in the cry of vanishing species, in the melting of ice, it whispered, "You are still my experiment, and I am still learning through you." The question was no longer whether Earth would survive. It always had, and it always would. The real question was whether humanity could remember its place within that endurance. For the first time, the teacher and the student were one. The Earth was learning through humanity, and humanity through Earth. Their destinies were no longer separate, but entwined, a shared consciousness, fragile and infinite, poised between destruction and renewal. The planet's long education, written in magma, water, and time, had entered its final chapter of self-awareness. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, lighting clouds with the same fire that had birthed the world, the Earth seemed to exhale, not in despair, but in patience, waiting to see what its children would choose to become next. There is a quiet rhythm to endings, a stillness that arrives not with collapse but with comprehension. After epochs of transformation, the Earth had finally reached a rare moment of reflection, a pause between breaths. The seas no longer roared for dominance. The winds no longer carried ash from endless fires. The planet had weathered every trial that time could offer, and now it stood in the calm aftermath of learning. The story was not of victory or defeat, but of realization, that creation and destruction had always been two halves of the same gesture. In this silence, the Earth listened to itself, as if hearing its own heartbeat for the first time in 1,000 ages. The scars of humanity's ambitions still marked the land. Dried riverbeds where fish once shimmered, cities of glass and steel crumbling into dust, and forests growing through the skeletons of roads. Yet even in ruin, life persisted. Moss crawled over concrete, vines reached into empty towers, and birds returned to places that had long been silent. Nature was never defeated, it only waited. The Earth had learned to endure not by resisting change, but by embracing it completely. Every extinction became the soil of new beginnings. Every silence the prelude to another song. But the most profound transformation was unseen. It was not written in the rocks or recorded in the fossils, but whispered through consciousness itself. Humanity, humbled by consequence, began to evolve inwardly. The endless hunger that once defined civilization gave way to curiosity, reverence, and restraint. Those who survived the collapse did not seek to rebuild the old world of dominance, but to rediscover harmony. Villages replaced empires. Simplicity replaced excess. People learned to live not on the land, but with it, to listen again, to notice again. The Earth was no longer an object of possession, but a companion in survival. In this new age, progress took a different shape. Instead of towering monuments or sprawling cities, humanity built gardens that fed both soil and soul. Technology was reborn as stewardship, machines that cleaned oceans, devices powered by wind and sun, networks designed to heal rather than consume. The remnants of the past were not erased, but transformed into lessons. Children grew up learning not just mathematics and language, but the patterns of tides, the patience of trees, the logic of migration. Knowledge had returned to its rightful source, the living world. The Earth responded to this shift like a deep exhale. Rivers cleared, forests thickened, and skies grew transparent again. Animals once thought lost began to reappear in quiet places. The rhythm of balance, broken for so long, began to hum again beneath every root and ripple. The planet had never needed perfection, only participation. It was not a paradise reborn, but a reconciliation, a long overdue dialogue between life and awareness. In this renewed conversation, the Earth spoke softly, and humanity, for once, listened without interrupting. Still, the lesson of time lingered like an echo. Change was inevitable, and cycles would continue. New forces would rise, climates would shift, and species would come and go. Yet there was a difference now, an understanding that endurance was not achieved through control, but through cooperation. The Earth's story had never been about domination. It was about balance between chaos and order, expansion and return. This awareness became humanity's quiet inheritance, the wisdom that survival without reverence is merely delay, not life. As centuries passed, the traces of the old world faded into myth. The ruins of ancient cities became sacred places, visited not with nostalgia but with gratitude. People gathered under open skies to tell the story of how the world once almost forgot itself, and how, through pain and rediscovery, it learned to remember. The stars above, unchanged and infinite, looked down upon this small planet where intelligence had finally met humility. The cosmos had always known that creation was cyclical, now Earth knew it too. In the end, there was no final catastrophe, no sudden end to the long experiment. The Earth did not die, nor did it conquer. It simply continued, breathing, evolving, dreaming in its endless dance of renewal. The mountains still shifted, the seas still sang, and the winds carried whispers of what once was and what would be again. The planet's long education was complete, not in closure but in continuity. For Earth had learned the simplest and most sacred truth, that to exist is to change, and to change is to live. And somewhere, in the rustle of leaves and the sigh of the tide, the world murmured a single, eternal promise, that every ending is only the beginning remembering itself. Night returns like a slow inhale, drawing the planet into the rhythm it has known since the first dawn cooled. In the darkness, Earth seems at rest, but beneath the silence, every molecule still hums with quiet movement. The deep oceans breathe, the mountains stretch imperceptibly, and in the thin air above, particles drift in invisible spirals. Night is not the absence of motion, it is the planet's way of dreaming. Each rotation, each shadow, each whisper of wind becomes part of this ancient lullaby. The world, having spent ages learning how to exist, now learns how to rest. To imagine the Earth asleep is to imagine peace earned through struggle. It took billions of years of noise to understand the value of quiet. In the beginning, there was only chaos, collisions, eruptions, ceaseless light. Now, after all that fire, comes darkness with meaning. The cooling crust became a skin of stillness, the oceans, mirrors of the stars. The same forces that once tore the planet apart now hold it together, balancing destruction with rest, effort with surrender. Night is the reward for endurance, the moment when gravity itself seems to soften its grip, letting the planet drift gently in the cradle of the cosmos. Yet even in stillness, the Earth continues its education. Night teaches patience. It teaches invisibility, that growth does not always require light, that creation can happen quietly, beneath the surface. Seeds break open underground. Currents shift in the unseen depths. Creatures of shadow emerge, guided not by sight but by instinct. There is wisdom in the unseen, just as there was once power in the explosion. Through darkness, the planet learns to trust the subtle, to find order without illumination. Above, the stars serve as silent mentors. Their light is ancient, a record of what once was, traveling across the emptiness to rest upon the skin of this world. To look upon them is to witness time itself stretched thin. The Earth, still learning, receives their lessons in quiet humility. It does not try to compete with their brilliance, it only reflects it. The moon, too, participates, a companion who reminds Earth of its own shadow, its own need for reflection. Together, they form a balance between solitude and connection, between light borrowed and light earned. As humanity sleeps, it too becomes part of this planetary meditation. The heart slows, the breath steadies, and consciousness drifts into the same rhythm that guides the tides. Every sleeper becomes an echo of the planet's rotation, a small mirror of its cosmic cycle. Our dreams are not separate from the world's dreaming, they are extensions of it. When we rest, we return to the same stillness that first cooled the molten crust, the same silence that once held the potential for all life. Sleep is not escape, it is return. There is a kind of sacred symmetry in this nightly rhythm. Each sunrise and sunset marks the heartbeat of the planet, contraction and release, awareness and surrender. Through this, Earth reminds its children of the most essential truth, that to rest is not to stop evolving, but to prepare for the next transformation. In every night lies the memory of beginning, in every dawn, the chance to start again. The world's rotation is its way of breathing through eternity, an endless inhale of shadow, an endless exhale of light. The scientists who study the planet often describe it in numbers and forces: rotation speed, axial tilt, orbital velocity. Yet behind those measurements lies poetry. The 24-hour day is not merely a mechanical rhythm, it is the language through which Earth speaks to its inhabitants. It says, learn to pause, learn to return, learn to begin again. It teaches that balance does not mean stillness, but movement guided by rest. Every dusk is a lesson, every dawn a graduation. And as the night deepens, the planet becomes transparent in its serenity. The great systems that once clashed, tectonics, storms, heat, and cold, now seem to dissolve into harmony. The quiet of midnight is not emptiness but fullness, a reminder that life does not need constant noise to prove it exists. The trees exhale, the oceans whisper, and even the stones seem to listen. This is how a planet meditates, not through absence but through rhythm. In this way, Earth continues to evolve, not just in form but in awareness. It learns to rest without decay, to move without chaos, to sustain without consuming. Its long education, written across time, finds expression in every nightfall. The darkness is not a void, it is a teacher, one that whispers to every living thing. You are part of something vast, and that vastness is gentle. So the Earth turns once more beneath the quiet constellations, steady and unhurried. The galaxies above continue their own slow lessons, stars burning and fading in infinite succession. Yet here, in this fragile blue sphere wrapped in shadow, something rare is happening. The planet is dreaming, not of what it has been, nor what it might become, but of the delicate peace it has learned to hold. It is the dream of endurance, the dream of understanding, the dream of rest. And somewhere, as the tide recedes and the air cools, the Earth murmurs its ancient lullaby, be still. You are learning to. Time is not a river flowing forward, but an ocean that folds upon itself, a living memory, rising and falling with each new age. For the Earth, time has never been a straight line. It is circular, spiraling, layered with echoes of its own past. The ground beneath our feet remembers every moment, the fire of creation, the shattering of continents, the trembling birth of life. Each grain of sand is a word from an older language, written by pressure, rewritten by wind. The planet does not forget. It carries its history not as burden, but as breath. Every storm, every tremor, every fossilized shell is part of a single heartbeat that began before life had a name. To understand Earth's memory, one must listen differently, not with ears, but with patience. Beneath the surface, the crust keeps silent records. Layers of sediment build like paragraphs in an ancient book. Volcanic ash marks the punctuation of catastrophe. Ice cores preserve the whispers of air from 1,000,000 years ago. Through these slow archives, the planet tells us its story, a story not of perfection, but persistence. It reminds us that survival does not mean erasing the past, it means carrying it forward, learning from its weight. The planet remembers so that it may not repeat its errors too easily. Humans, in their brief moment of awareness, often see time as fleeting, measured in decades, in generations. Yet for the Earth, 1,000 years is the span of a breath. Mountains rise and fall within what the planet would call a heartbeat. Rivers carve canyons that stretch across eons. Stars that once illuminated its skies have long vanished, and still, the Earth turns, unchanged in its devotion to movement. This vastness humbles the human mind, which seeks beginnings and endings, but the planet knows only continuance, the endless repetition of creation, decay, and renewal. When we stand beside a quiet lake or touch a stone smoothed by centuries, we are touching memory itself. These are not dead things, they are living witnesses. The rock beneath your hand once flowed like water. The air in your lungs once circled the skies of ancient forests. Even your blood carries the same iron that once burned in dying stars. There is no separation between us and the planet's memory, we are expressions of it. We are Earth's attempt to remember itself more clearly, to look upon its own reflection and understand. In this way, consciousness was not a sudden invention, but an awakening long prepared. The Earth dreamed for billions of years before the first thought arose within it. Life, in all its fragile forms, became a method of remembering, each cell a journal entry, each species a new dialect in the language of existence. When humanity appeared, the planet began to think aloud. Through human eyes, it could finally see the stars it had orbited for so long. Through human questions, it could wonder about its own origin. We are not separate from the Earth's intelligence, we are its latest experiment in awareness. But memory is both gift and burden. The Earth remembers every extinction, every flood, every imbalance. It has witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, the warming and cooling of ages, the echo of destruction repeating in familiar rhythms. Each time, the planet adjusts, adapts, renews, but it never forgets. Its resilience is not infinite, only enduring. It learns slowly, as all great minds do, but its lessons are written in consequence. When forests burn, when glaciers retreat, when species vanish, these are not punishments. They are reminders that the same lessons will return until they are understood. And yet, beneath that gravity, there is grace. For all the suffering recorded in its stones, the Earth also remembers beauty. It remembers the first coral blooming beneath a new sun, the migration of whales through endless seas, the laughter of rivers carving through ancient valleys. It holds these memories as tenderness, proof that even in chaos, harmony is possible. The planet has learned that life always finds a way to return, not through dominance, but through persistence. Perhaps that is the greatest wisdom Earth has gathered in its long education, that memory itself is a form of mercy. To remember is to love, to keep what is past alive in another form. Every fossil, every drop of amber, every buried seed is an act of remembrance. The planet does not mourn its past, it reuses it. It turns decay into soil, loss into nourishment, death into new creation. Forgetting is impossible, but forgiveness is built into the cycle. So when we gaze across the horizon, seeing mountains softened by time, clouds tracing the same paths that once carried storms, we are witnessing the planet's long memory in motion. It is not haunted by what has been, it is sustained by it. Earth is a scholar of its own mistakes, a patient learner whose classroom spans the cosmos. Its memory does not weigh it down, it steadies it. And as the night deepens and the world continues its quiet rotation, the Earth dreams again, not of what was lost, but of what remains. Every sound in the dark, the whisper of wind, the shifting of leaves, the slow heartbeat of waves, is memory transformed into music. Time at last becomes gentle. The past is not gone, it is simply resting, waiting to awaken again in another form. For the Earth, memory is not a wound, but a rhythm, the pulse that keeps learning alive. There comes a moment in every long journey when stillness becomes wisdom, when the restless urge to evolve gives way to quiet comprehension. For Earth, that moment does not mean the end of learning, but the deepening of it. The planet, after eons of upheaval and renewal, begins to sense a kind of inner equilibrium. It has discovered that survival is not a victory, but a dialogue between chaos and calm, creation and decay, awareness and surrender. What began as molten fire has become mindful rhythm. The Earth no longer fights to exist, it simply exists with purpose, breathing in tune with the stars. This is the era of reflection, not of action, but of understanding. The planet has watched countless suns rise and fall, species emerge and disappear, mountains crumble into sand. It has felt the pressure of ice and fire, the touch of water, the silence of vacuum. Through all of this, it has learned the most subtle of truths, that permanence is an illusion, and beauty is born from impermanence. Every wave breaks to teach the ocean humility, every leaf falls to remind the forest of renewal. The Earth's wisdom lies not in what it has built, but in what it has learned to let go. If one listens closely, there is a pulse beneath everything, a soft, slow rhythm that unites the smallest atom with the farthest galaxy. It is not sound but presence, a cosmic heartbeat that the Earth has spent billions of years learning to hear. The rotation of the planet, the orbit of the moon, the tides, the seasons, all of them are verses in a single cosmic poem about balance. To exist is to participate in that rhythm, to move without resistance, to belong without ownership. This is what the Earth has been studying all along, how to be both small and infinite, fragile yet eternal. Humanity, as part of this awakening, stands at the threshold of understanding. For ages, humans looked outward, mapping the stars, measuring the cosmos, chasing the edges of knowledge. Yet all along, the lesson was beneath their feet. The planet that carried them was the very teacher they sought. The Earth, through its patience and pain, has modeled what wisdom looks like: endurance without arrogance, change without panic, generosity without condition. It offers its air, its water, its warmth, never asking for worship, only for awareness. To walk gently upon it is to honor a truth older than language. There is a calmness that comes with comprehension, a sense that the purpose of existence is not conquest, but participation. The Earth has always known this. Every mountain, every desert, every gust of wind plays its part in maintaining the balance of the whole. When a tree grows, it does not claim the sunlight, it shares it through shade and oxygen. When a predator hunts, it does not destroy the herd, it strengthens it through renewal. Even the storms serve a purpose, cleansing the air, redistributing the heat, teaching motion to the still. Through every act of seeming violence, there is instruction. The planet teaches in paradox, but its lessons are clear. Harmony is not the absence of struggle, but the understanding of it. Over time, humanity begins to align with this deeper rhythm. The more they learn about the Earth, the less they feel the need to control it. Science transforms into reverence. Technology becomes an instrument of care. The concept of progress changes, no longer defined by expansion or dominance, but by balance, restoration, and humility. People begin to realize that intelligence is not measured by what one can build, but by what one can sustain. In that understanding, human consciousness grows quieter, deeper, and closer to the rhythm of the planet itself. The Earth, in turn, seems to respond. The atmosphere clears, ecosystems heal, and once extinct species reappear in unexpected places. The planet's resilience, long underestimated, begins to sing again. Its surface hums with possibility, its cycles find steadiness. The world has learned, not through divine intervention, but through patience. It has become a place where knowledge and nature coexist, where curiosity serves harmony instead of hunger. The Earth is no longer a battlefield between life and decay, it is a conversation between them. Yet, even now, the planet does not declare itself complete. It knows that learning is infinite, that evolution is not a destination but a song that never ends. Somewhere deep within its molten core, the same fire that birthed the world still burns, reminding it that creation requires restlessness. But this restlessness is no longer chaotic. It is measured, knowing, rhythmic. The Earth has learned how to hold both tension and tranquility in its orbit. It has learned to grow gently. From space, the planet glows like a quiet lantern in an endless sea. Its colors shift with mood and season, blue, green, white, and gold. To the distant stars, it must seem alive, breathing softly in its long solitude. Perhaps that is what the universe intended all along, that each world would learn its own form of awareness, each planet its own kind of peace. Earth, after eons of searching, has found the beginning of that peace. And as the light of another dawn spills across its curved horizon, the Earth turns again, slow, deliberate, unhurried. It carries the memory of its mistakes, the grace of its survival, and the quiet strength of its wisdom. It does not know what comes next, but it no longer fears uncertainty. For a planet that has learned how to be, every moment, even the unknown, is sacred. And so, it continues to revolve in perfect rhythm, whispering to the stars the single truth it has finally understood. To exist is to learn, and to learn is to love. The end of the story is not an ending at all. It is a return to the beginning, a slow circling back to the pulse from which everything emerged. The Earth still turns, steady and unhurried, through the soft darkness of space. It has done this for over 4 billion years, and it will continue long after every trace of us fades into silence. Yet the rhythm feels different now, as though the planet has finally learned the quiet art of understanding. After ages of chaos, the Earth is no longer a child of fire or a student of disaster. It has become a listener. It listens to the deep hum of its oceans, the whisper of its forests, the soft sigh of its mountains breathing. It listens to the space around it, to the stars that once watched it burn and now watch it glow with calm. What began as raw matter has matured into wisdom. The planet has learned that growth does not always mean change, that sometimes evolution is stillness, the ability to endure without grasping, to exist without demanding. It has discovered that its purpose was never perfection, but participation. To belong to the universe is not to conquer it, but to move in rhythm with it. The molten heart that once thrashed with violence now beats with patience, keeping time with the music of gravity and light. Everything that has ever happened, every storm, every extinction, every birth, still lives within that heartbeat. The Earth carries its own story like a song that has no final note. Once, it struggled against itself. Continents collided, seas consumed mountains, ice swallowed forests. But over time, the planet learned that conflict and harmony are not opposites. They are mirrors. Without tension, there is no growth. Without silence, there is no song. The Earth became a master of this paradox, learning to hold contradiction without fear. In the cool calm of its twilight, It now understands that destruction was never punishment, only transformation. The lava that once burned became fertile soil. The storms that once drowned valleys carved the paths for rivers. The losses that once felt unbearable gave birth to balance. It has always been this way, a cycle of unending renewal, pain folding into peace. Humanity, too, has changed with it. The noise that once filled the world, the endless building, burning, consuming, has softened. People have learned to live not in defiance of the planet, but in concert with it. The old obsession with progress has turned into a fascination with presence. They plant trees instead of monuments, build sanctuaries instead of cities, and measure wealth not in possession but in peace. The sky above their homes is clear again, the rivers move unchained, the soil is dark with life. They have remembered what their ancestors once knew but forgot in the fever of ambition, that to care for the earth is to care for themselves. At night, they gather under open skies and tell stories, not of gods who created the world, but of a world that taught itself to endure. They speak softly, reverently, of how the earth was once young and wild, and how through ages of suffering it learned grace. They understand now that every generation is part of the same long education, that the planet is not a place they inherit, but a teacher they continue. Each human life becomes a single note in the planet's larger melody, and that melody plays on even as individual voices fade. The earth feels this change, not through thought, but through balance. It senses harmony in the gentle weight of the atmosphere, in the even breathing of its ecosystems, in the quiet return of animals once gone. The forests hum with renewal, coral reefs glow again beneath gentle waters, and winds carry seeds across open plains. Even the glaciers, slow and ancient, seem to sigh with relief. The world is no longer fighting itself. It is learning alongside its inhabitants, both species and soil becoming students of the same cosmic rhythm. In the deep time of the universe, these moments are brief. Stars are born and die in the span of what, to the Earth, feels like an afternoon. And yet, this small planet, this fragile world of blue and green, has achieved something miraculous. It has made meaning out of impermanence. It has transformed survival into understanding. It has shown that even in a universe defined by entropy, there can exist a place that remembers, adapts, forgives. The Earth's resilience is not a refusal to change, it is its ability to change beautifully. Now, when we imagine the world from afar, a glowing sphere suspended in infinite black, we see more than a planet. We see a living record of time, a poem written in orbit. Every swirl of cloud, every shimmer of sea, every streak of light across its horizon is a verse in that poem. It is not a story of triumph, nor one of despair. It is a story of persistence, of a world that learned to turn its suffering into song. And through that song, it became aware of itself, not as a perfect creation, but as a perpetual lesson. The Earth continues to spin, not toward an ending, but into the rhythm of forever. Its moon traces its path like a companion who understands, keeping watch over tides and time. The sun rises and sets, not as repetition, but as reminder, that each cycle is sacred, each day a renewal of the vow to keep learning. The universe listens quietly, for in the music of this small planet lies a reflection of its own longing, the desire to become more than matter, to become meaning. Perhaps that is what consciousness truly is, not the spark of intellect, but the ability to learn with love. To observe, to adapt, to forgive, to continue. The Earth has done all of these things. It has loved without possession, given without condition, endured without bitterness. It has watched entire epochs come and go, and still it turns, still it breathes, still it holds. The patience of its orbit is a lesson written in silence. Nothing lasts forever, and that is what makes it beautiful. And so the dawn arrives once more. The first light spills over mountains and seas, touching leaves wet with dew, warming the air that hums with life. Somewhere in that brightness, the Earth stirs awake, not as something finished, but as something ready. It has learned from chaos how to create, from silence how to sing, from loss how to love. It knows that its education will never end, and it welcomes that truth like sunlight. If you listen closely, you can hear it, faint, rhythmic, infinite. The heartbeat of a planet that has traveled from fire to thought, from destruction to wisdom, from isolation to belonging. It says, softly, to all who rest upon it, do not fear your incompleteness. I, too, am unfinished. I, too, am still learning. And as its words dissolve into the wind, the Earth turns again beneath the stars, serene, radiant, unending, carrying with it the oldest lesson in the cosmos. that to exist is to learn, and to learn is to love, and love, in its truest form, is simply to remain.